which is on anesthesia and perioperative management of geriatric spine by Dr. Amardeep Kaur.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, organizing team and Dr. Pathak sir, for giving me opportunity on this front. I'm here to present anesthesia and perioperative management in geriatric spine. So my discussion would be on physiological changes and comorbidities in elderly, prone positioning and its implications, fluid management in major spine surgeries, and a word about guidelines regarding complex issues in perioperative geriatric care. So physiological changes include cardiovascular changes. With aging, there is decrease in elasticity and increased vascular stiffness. That leads to increase in afterload on left ventricle with increased systolic blood pressure. So that there is increased left ventricular wall thickness that leads to decreased compliance and impaired diastolic function. There is dropout of atrial pacemaker cells with decrease in intrinsic heart rate. And there is a reduced autonomic responsiveness that results in increased sympathetic nervous system activity, decreased parasympathetic nervous system activity, baroreceptor response is impaired. So this imbalance of sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system drive to heart that results in decrease in heart rate variability. And all these factors, they set the stage for various cardiovascular events seen in this age group. This also includes decreased venous compliance and decrease in preload. So that makes them prone to orthostatic hypotension. And to add to that, they have labile blood pressure intraoperatively due to changes in sympathetic tone, due to waxing and waning surgical stimulus, variable depth of anesthesia, changes in volume status, and prone positioning. Respiratory changes include decreased lung elasticity and volumes, making them prone to barotrauma, hypoventilation, decreased respiratory reserve, decreased oxygen diffusing capacity, increased closing capacity leading to atelectasia, increased airway dead space, decreased protective airway reflexes leading to aspiration pneumonia, possible diseases like obesity, COPD. Under stressful conditions, all these factors, they make them prone to hypoxemia. Neurological changes include decrease in nervous tissue mass, neuronal density, and loss of neurotransmitters. There is impaired thermoregulation. They are more prone to cognitive dysfunction. Dementia is present in 22% over 80s. Renal changes include marked changes and decreases in renal blood flow and glomerular filtration rate. They are prone to dehydration because of impaired thirst mechanism and fluid overload because of impaired sodium handling. There is reduced ability to concentrate and dilute urine. There is decline in hepatic function and metabolism. And musculoskeletal changes include decreased exercise tolerance, so it becomes difficult to assess fitness in this age group. Airway changes include arthritic changes in cervical spine that makes spine stiff, and there is decreased range of motion. Apart from that, there is smaller mouth opening, smaller bloating opening, fragility that makes it them prone to cervical spine injury during intubation or proning. Various medical comorbidities, they not only impact the decision to undertake a procedure, but also they impact the magnitude of the procedure. So various comorbidities include myocardial disease, chronic hypertension, valvular heart diseases, conduction disturbances, others like COPD, obesity, chronic kidney disease, peripheral vascular disease. They may have a history of bypass, coronary artery bypass, congestive heart failure, low ejection fraction. They may be on anticoagulants, antiplatelets, antihypertensives, more prone to dysrhythmias. They're more prone to postoperative pulmonary complications. So preoperative risk assessments relies on evaluation of clinical predictors, functional capacity, and surgical specific risk. Clinical predictors of increased cardiac risks of myocardial infarction, congestive heart failure, and death, they are placed in major, intermediate, and minor criteria. Functional capacity in clinical practice, exercise tolerance, it best reflects the quality of biological age, and it is the most important predictor. It's expressed as metabolic equivalence. Basically, it's a clinical questionnaire that records your daily activity. It is scored from 1 to 10. Patients unable to meet format demand in most daily activities, they are at increased risk of both short and long-term perioperative cardiac risk. Surgical specific risk includes high, where the combined incidence of myocardial infarction and death is more than 5%, and that includes emergent major operations, particularly in the elderly, other procedures associated with large fluid shifts and blood loss, and intermediate, where the incidence is less than 5%, and low, where it's less than 1%. These guidelines are somewhat ambiguous as to clinical significance of advanced age as an independent risk predictor. However, the combination of all these factors, it influences overall extent of cardiovascular risk. So coming to prone position and its implications. Now, prone position is often a necessity to get access to posterior structures. However, many complications are associated with prone positioning due to physiological changes occurring due to increased pressure on the anterior structures. So many positions and devices with advantages and disadvantages have been described under a blanket term prone position. Prone position includes physiological changes. First of all, cardiovascular changes. This happens due to tremendous pressure on the thorax and abdomen. So with increased intra-abdominal pressure, there is IVC compression that leads to increased central venous pressure. So there could be venous stasis, thrombotic complications, and prolonged surgeries. With increased intrathoracic pressure, there is decreased venous return, decreased left ventricular compliance that leads to decreased filling and decreased ventricular volume. So cardiac index and stroke volume is reduced. With raised central venous pressure, that reduced cardiac index and stroke volume results in drop in blood pressure, which is often seen while turning the patient from spine to prone position. And central venous system is also connected to epidural venous system and episcleral venous system. So whenever central venous system is raised, so that pressure is transmitted to these vessels, they are connected by multiple thin-walled channels. Respiratory changes, there is enough evidence of improvement of respiratory functions in prone position. Lung volumes and functional residual capacities, they are improved. However, respiratory compliance is decreased and peak airway pressures are increased. There is improved ventilation and perfusion matching and consequently improved oxygenation. Hemodynamic complications occur due to raised central venous pressure. So that may lead to increased venous bleeding in the surgical field. When in combination with baseline hypotension and decreased cardiac function in prone position, that could lead to hypoperfusion to multiple organs in prolonged surgeries. So appropriate positioning and frames are required to free abdomen, especially in obese patients. Neurological complications include arterial occlusion of major vessels like carotid and vertebral. That happens due to extremes of neck rotation and acute flexion. So that can lead to stasis, thrombosis, embolic complications like stroke. Spinal cord dysfunction includes acute cervical disc herniation. This occurs because of a combination of neck extension during intubation and proning, or spinal cord ischemia due to increased venous pressure and persistent hypotension in prolonged surgeries. There could be nerve ischemia from undue stretching and direct pressure, brachial plexopathy, ulnar nerve injury, lateral cutaneous nerve of thigh injury. So it's imperative to use SSEP and MAT monitoring in major spine corrective surgeries. There could be direct pressure injuries like pressure sores of face, breast, genitalia, and chest as shown in these figures, contact dermatitis of the face, submandibular gland swelling due to kinking and stretching of the salivary ducts due to non-neutral neck position. So that leads to obstruction to lymphatic drainage. Indirect pressure injuries include tracheal and mediastinal compression, avascular necrosis of femoral head, limb compartment syndrome, and rhabdomyolysis. Coming to ocular complications, that is postoperative visual loss, which is a serious complication of prolonged prone spine surgery that is related to one of these two causes, like ischemic optic neuropathy and central retinal artery occlusion. Others include orbital compartment syndrome, bilateral angle closure glaucoma, and detached retina. So overall incidence in spine surgeries is 0.5 to 1%, and elevated intraocular pressure is related to the amount of time patient is in prone position. So it can reach up to 40 millimeters of mercury, and normal being 8 to 20. The mechanism being elevated IOP due to raised central venous pressure causes optic nerve injury and decreased occlusion perfusion pressure. So this perfusion pressure is, it is actually the pressure difference between the pressure in the ciliary arteries of the optic nerve and venous drainage of the eye. And this pressure difference is approximated by the level of intraocular pressure. So higher the intraocular pressure, decreased perfusion pressure of the ocular perfusion pressure, and hence decreased perfusion of the optic nerve head. So it can be anterior when it includes optic part of the ocular part of the optic nerve, and posterior when it involves the orbital part of the optic nerve. Now, central retinal artery occlusion occurs due to pressure on the eye in the prone position because of prominent portion of the headrest. So that leads to elevated IOP, leads to decreased perfusion pressure of the central retinal arteries. So that leads to ischemia of the retina. Various risk factors leading to this are surgical duration more than 6 hours, greater estimated blood loss, increased ratio of crystalloid to colloids, horseshoe headrest, Wilson frame use, male sex, obesity, diabetes. Positioning the patient in 5 to 10 degree reverse Trendelenburg position, they can somewhat prevent the complications related to postoperative visual loss. And secondly, we can stage the procedure if the duration exceeds more than 6.5 hours. Coming to airway issues and cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So oropharyngeal edema and macroglossia is a complication of prolonged prone surgery due to excessive flexion of head and neck, causing obstruction to venous drainage. So that leads to delayed extubation. There could be obstruction to endotracheal tube with thick secretions, or there could be accidental tube displacement in odd positions. Coming to cardiovascular compromise and cardiac arrest, it can occur if there are pre-existing cardiac abnormalities, chest deformity like pectus excavatum, massive blood loss, fluid shifts, venous air embolism, hypothermia, and wound irrigation with hydrogen peroxide. When cardiac arrest occurs, we may need to initiate compression in prone position, as turning the patient to supine position may not be feasible because of open wound, ongoing blood loss, exposed metal work, and stretcher may not be available immediately. So first figure shows the placement of hands between T7 to T9 for compressions, and black line marks the inferior scapular limit. And second figure shows the pad positioning for defibrillation in prone position. So coming to fluid management, there is insufficient evidence to support best practices. However, they emphasize on goal-directed fluid therapy. This strategy utilizes titration of fluids and vasopressors to target values tailored to patients' cardiovascular physiology. And various target hemodynamic variables include pulse pressure variation, stroke pressure, stroke volume variation, ABG, clinical assessment of peripheral perfusion, urine output, and trends in CVP. Consider using colloids early in major and complex surgeries, prophylactic use of tranexamic acid, and keeping a low transfusion threshold of around 24% hematocrit or 8 gram/% for complex and major surgeries. So optimal preoperative assessment of surgical geriatric patients, a structured checklist and a best practices guidelines have been formulated by American College of Surgeons, National Surgical Quality Improvement Program, and American Geriatric Society. The first part of the guidelines include 9 assessment categories. Apart from cardiac and pulmonary evaluation, they emphasize on cognitive and behavioral disorders. That includes screening for pre-existing cognitive dysfunction, screening for substance abuse, screening for depression. And next is functional performance status that includes fall history, then frailty index, nutritional status, medication management, patient counseling, and preoperative assessment. And second part of the guidelines targets the rest of the perioperative period till the patient is discharged. So to summarize, there is need for explicit attention to detail in managing surgically elderly patients. An interprofessional team with adequate training and excellent communication is required in decreasing morbidity and mortality. We should be aware of various physiological changes and comorbidities and carefully plan positioning and supportive padding, especially to alleviate pressures of key structures and increase vigilance. They are evidence-based recommendations. And thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor, for that excellent presentation and a very detailed presentation on anesthesia and related complications, which we often overlook as around 2 minutes for discussion. So if there are any questions, if anybody wants to. Okay, Dr. Pathak, you introduced us to a lot of lines and a lot of angles and all of those things. If as a junior surgeon who's doing geriatric surgery or comes across a case, which is one factor that you would suggest them to keep in mind, which you feel is probably most important amongst so many of them?
Thank you. That was a very important question. It's not one line which is the thing that we can consider. but I would emphasize that the pelvic incidence, when you take the X-ray of the lumbar spine specifically,
Okay.
you have to
Dr.
include the hip
Amardeep,
joint.
can you mute yourself, please? Sorry.
So if you take the femur head along with the X-ray of the lumbar spine, it will give you the pelvic incidence, and that defines how much the stress on the.
Dr. Amardeep, can you please mute yourself? We can't hear. We cannot.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Pathak, please.
Yes. Sir, you are also muted.
Dr. Pathak, please. You are muted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I do is that I include the hip joint in my lateral view of the spine,
Okay.
and that incidence and the sacral slope, these are the things which guide me how this spine is going to be in terms of preoperative and postoperative course. So that's one thing. So routinely I ask for, I'm talking lumbar spine now, of course, AP view, which it will show lateral listhesis in severe degenerative spine, as I showed you the extreme forms, and in the AP view that you see all the changes, and the lateral view, of course, shows the extent of lordosis and the pelvic incidence and the sacral slope. Those are the two things I consider a very important factor to decide my strategy. And as I said, the pain is multifactorial. So you have to really listen to the patient, as Brigadier Bhatoi has mentioned. What is the important factor in this? What is causing the pain? Is the pain simply because of one factor, or is it because of a mixed reaction to the degenerative changes? Are there already some listhesis existing, which might be subtle and mild, and sometimes they are quite extensive? So if you have to do a surgery which is minimal, then you have to be very sure that things won't progress after your surgery. But if you are saying that there are a lot of already destructive changes in different areas of the spine, above and below, and you just do a minimal surgery and come out, those other levels which are not really doing well would then come into prominence and play with more symptoms. So then you have to decide about whether to fix or stabilize or do whatever it is. So it is a complex equation, and a little bit of guess is there. And sometimes you have to be judicious, as Dr. Amardeep Kaur showed, that the patient might not be that strong enough to withstand a 6-hour surgery. Whether we can do something in 2 hours and come out and give some relief. And I then, of course, use a lot of nerve injections, transforaminal injections to give relief to the pain. So that's how you manage.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for that.
I have a point for Dr.
For the younger surgeons, I'm sure.
I have just one point to make in Dr. Amandeep's presentation. Actually, my neuroanesthesiologist, he was so mortally afraid of this giving us patient in prone position because of the problems with the eyes. That is, he must have had a couple of bad cases. So he never allowed us to position the patient in a horseshoe headrest. In every patient, we had to put the pin, that is
fix the head.
That is true, sir. That is the situation here also. So we had a case. We had a case with
I
the
also found it
surgeon.
very convenient now. I mean, I find it easier to position a patient with a pin fixation.